Anna Ciriani-Dean and Shélynn. Oh man, I knew I was going to mess that up.
Sorry, it is Ciriani-Dean.
I
Sorry.
messed it up. Ciriani.
All right.
Haley, who's listening to this right now and is editing it. I'm sorry, Haley. I'm going to try that again. Okay. All right, here we go. Anna Ciriani-Dean and Shélynn Riel, thank you so much for joining us on Highest Aspirations.
Thank
Hi.
you so much. Hi, Steve. We're so excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yes, lovely to see you. This is just such a great opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited. This is like a nice time zone one. We've done this before, but I have to mention that so I'm on the East Coast and on the seacoast of New Hampshire, about an hour north of Boston. Anna is in Seattle and Shey is
Mhm.
all the way in Italy. You said between Rome and Naples in some village
Yes.
somewhere, Shey, a
Yes.
sabbatical.
Yes. I'm in Itri right now. Yes.
Mhm.
E-tree. I love it. Beautiful. Well, this is one of the cool things about podcasting and technology is that we can do this and come all
Mhm.
together to talk about the work that you're doing. I also want to recognize first that a lot of times in this on the highest aspirations now, it used to be me going out and finding guests and reaching out to folks. More and more, it's people that I work with on my team that I love here at Elevation that introduce people. So it was Liam Egan, I believe, who
Mhm.
introduced me to you all. Anna, where was that?
Yeah, so I met Liam. I was an exhibitor for English language programs for the U.S. Department of State at the what was it called? La Cosecha
Yep.
Dual Language Education Conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico in November 2023. And I was just wandering around and stumbled upon the elevation table and started chatting with some of your colleagues.
Love it. So thanks, Liam. Appreciate it. I think it has got to be the second or third one that he's introduced me to, and that's a great thing. He's really a great team member, and I appreciate him making the
Mhm.
introduction. Um, so this is really cool because you all also have a podcast. And so
Mhm.
we were before we started, we were talking about podcasting and all the stuff we do to prepare, and there's a lot of similarities and stealing each other's stuff so we get better, like as we do as teachers, or as former teachers. So I want to start there. Like, what was the inspiration behind starting the Teacher Think Aloud podcast, and your decision specifically to focus on something that I think is really important, which is reflective pedagogy?
Wow. All right. Well, we'll give you sort of the brief version, Steve. We don't want to bore your listeners, but Anna and I met when we were colleagues adjuncting at Fordham University within the intensive English language program there in New York City. And we were colleagues and we were just very eager to collaborate with each other. We would find each other sitting in, the teacher's room and say, "Hey, I just found this resource. I tried this out. It was fantastic. Give it a try. What are you working on this week?" So it started off as really sort of accidental or unconscious reflection, and it turned into a friendship and more structured sharing over time. We really connected on this belief that communal reflection is one of the more effective ways to improve your practice as a
Mhm.
teacher. And Anna, you can go in and elaborate a bit more, but Anna facilitated these chat and sips at Fordham University, which were just these
Mhm.
informal gatherings of colleagues where she would choose a theme and we would sit down and just chat about what was happening in the classroom. And I really appreciated,
Mhm.
the opportunity to connect with colleagues. Um, and personally, when I was starting out in my career, I was a very young program director, and I worked with teachers who had been teaching for, the entire my entire life, right? So they were very experienced. And
Mhm.
so I started thinking about how I could make, as a young, sort of naive program director, how I could make professional development feel inclusive and serve as a facilitator of conversation and professional development rather than, pretend that I know more than these seasoned educators. So both of these experiences really informed our belief in communal reflection and the importance of it. Um, and I guess, and Anna, you can jump in whenever you want to, but we were both English language fellows with the Department of State. Anna in Armenia, and I was in Argentina.
Mhm.
And, in those experiences, we had a chance to mentor teachers and develop professional development for them. But what we found was that no matter where we went in the world, there was this common theme. Teachers just wanted a chance to connect with each other
Yeah.
Mhm.
more in depth.
break out of
And
their
so that's,
silos. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I think that that is sort of where the idea from the podcast came from. Anna, do you want to jump
Mhm.
in there? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I mean, I really wouldn't have done this podcast without Shey as the impetus. I mean, she has so many great ideas. I think it was her idea to really focus on reflective practice originally, and I think we just have so much mutual respect for each other as teachers, professionals outside of teaching and beyond. But then also, that kind of philosophy that we started with, about reflecting and communally working with other teachers is sort of what informs the structure of what our podcast actually looks like today, which is considering different aspects of teaching through this reflective lens. And so we build that into the structure of our episodes by, even before the episode comes out, posting questions and then integrating any voices and any ideas that our listeners share with us through social media, via email, into the episodes. And then we also are always asking these questions for reflection so that everybody can kind of reflect together
Sure.
on these topics. So it really permeates everything that we do.
Yeah, like this, you just kind of summed up what I was gonna say, Anna, and like sort of the power of what I think a podcast does, or any kind of medium like it, and that is like it extends the ability to have what you were talking about, Shay, those chat and sips. It's just
Mhm.
it's such a natural human thing for us to do when we do anything and we want to reflect on it and get better and improve, but somehow it just gets overly maybe complicated in education in some
Mhm.
way. Not that there shouldn't be structure and there shouldn't be like built-in opportunities to do it, but what I really love about what the work that you're doing is it's very approachable and it's very informal. I always tell people like with
Mm.
this podcast, Highest Aspirations, we'll talk about some pretty heavy themes, newcomers, family engagement, cultural responsibility, everything. It's not
Mhm.
professional development. It's giving you the idea, hopefully, it's getting you inspired a little bit and hopefully joining a conversation with others. And so I also love that element of community and asking questions that you bring in as well.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So now that we have the like kind of background here, let's try to set this up in a way that people that are listening can kind of gain some ideas and some clarity about what you're doing, and then go to your podcast to actually learn a little bit more. So I want to start with episode one. And in episode one in the podcast, you mentioned John Dewey's quote, which I think is a good one. We do not learn from
Mhm.
experience, we learn from reflecting on experience.
Mhm.
So how has that philosophy influenced your understanding of reflective pedagogy, and why do you consider it sort of foundational for everyone involved in this work?
Yeah, I mean the quote really kind of explains itself, but no matter how many years that we've been in the classroom, how many workshops we go to, the feedback that we get from observations, we have so much experience as teachers. We're constantly experiencing, but we're not necessarily going to absorb it and integrate what we're learning through those experiences unless we take a moment to stop and reflect on that. So simply teaching, that quote, it really helps us understand reflective pedagogy, reflective practice as just taking a moment to pause. Simply teaching isn't enough. We need to create space for thoughtful reflection and allowing new ideas to emerge from that reflection. And so it's really foundational, because without that reflective component, what are we actually taking forward with us from all of the experiences that we're gathering?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, like I said earlier, that a few minutes ago, that like it's such a natural thing to do to kind of reflect and to think about what we do. But in order to make it a part of the process, this kind of gets me to my next question. You
Mhm.
also talk about this experiential learning cycle. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know how to pronounce this. David Cobb or Kolb? How do you
Cool.
Kolb?
Mhm.
I've seen it. I've seen his name a million times, and okay, great. Now I know. So, but you start to discuss the experimental learning cycle by David Kolb. It- And I think that gets into like how we actually integrate this into the work. But I'd love to hear it from you. What are some of the ways you've observed that cycle help educators improve? And I guess more importantly, like what are some of the results that you've observed or that the research has shown in the students that those teachers serve, because that's really the end game, right?
Yeah, Steve, if you don't mind, I would just love to sort of briefly overview what the experiential learning
Yeah,
cycle is for our
please do.
listeners who may not be familiar with David Kolb. So for us, this really is I guess, a guiding force, a sort of life force in the work that we do as teachers.
Yeah.
The experiential learning cycle it tells us that learning is cyclical, right? Which, if we pause and we ponder, we realize that that's true, right? We don't need a fancy model to tell us that, but we find that Kolb's work is really useful for teachers in making this reflective component more accessible, and sort of breaking it down. So what does it look like? The experiential learning cycle, the first stage is a concrete experience. So when we're thinking about teaching, a teaching experience. The second piece is the reflective observation stage.
Mm,
So I'm a big fan of recording myself while teaching, both online and in person. So for stage 2 for me, this reflective observation stage, it might mean reviewing a class that I conducted on Zoom, but ultimately going back and looking at whatever that concrete experience was. So here, the goal might be to examine your lesson plan or a part of your lesson and think about how it really compares with your thought process while you were teaching, and maybe reactions that you had or you didn't have while you were teaching.
mhm.
So after that, you have the abstract conceptualization. And it sounds scary, but ultimately it's just, drawing conclusions or learning something from the experience. And then lastly, you have the active experimentation. And that's when you sit down and you really become intentional about your next steps, about trying out something new based on what you've learned from this process of reflection. Um,
Mhm.
so let's see, I think that
Yeah, I mean, it just
yeah, go
starts
ahead,
all
Anna.
over
Yeah.
from there, right?
Mhm.
Because
Yep.
the
Yes.
idea is that it's ongoing, right? I mean,
Yes.
that it doesn't end with, okay, I learned something, we're going to stop here and move on,
Mhm.
but it's
Mhm.
a continual feedback loop that you're really engaging in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oh, sorry,
No,
go
go ahead.
ahead. Well, I was just going to say, you found that in episode 1, and we were really trying to answer the question, what is reflective pedagogy? And ultimately, we think that we just need to reframe, how we're looking at professional development, how we're looking at improving as an educator. Studies have shown that ongoing professional learning is more effective than sort of one-time
Yeah.
interventions, those sort of ad hoc workshops that we've all participated
Mhm.
in. And so we really wanted to give teachers the opportunity to craft their own meaningful and effective professional learning
Hmm.
experience, if you will.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was going to say that studies have shown that. I can't resist, but also the looks on people's
Mhm.
faces when they walk out of some of those
Oh,
workshops that
yeah.
aren't very effective also show that. And the opposite is
Hmm.
also true.
Yeah.
When a
Yep.
teacher is engaged in reflective learning cycles, or experiential learning cycles, or
Mhm.
that sort of learn, teach, reflect model, there's continuous growth. I think
Mhm.
what what was one of the best things I ever did as a teacher, but also one of the most horrifying things I did,
Oh,
Shey, was something that
Where's this going?
well, yeah, some of that was what you actually just mentioned, which is recording myself teaching. And this was a long time ago. I was a high school Spanish teacher, and I got national board certification. And part of that process, to their credit, national board certification, was you had to engage in this learn, teach, reflect model. And part of that was you had to record yourself teaching. You had to
Mhm.
analyze it, you had to write it up, and you had to send it in. Sending it in was no problem, but me watching myself teaching, and it was
yeah.
live and in person. We had one of those. I'm not promoting this company. I don't know if they're still around, but it's called a swivel. And
Oh, yes.
yeah, you
Yes,
had
we're
like the
familiar.
little thing on your
Mhm.
neck, and it kind of followed you
Yeah.
around. And this was a long time ago, before like that was like, that was like cutting edge technology. And so the
Mm.
thing would like follow me around the room. I remember I had like a stack of dictionaries. And so while I was teaching, I had to get used to actually having the thing follow me around, forgetting it was there. And once that happened, then I had to get used to going back and looking and hearing
Mhm.
myself and watching myself and
Hmm.
hearing the students engage. It was very rewarding, but very difficult. So I guess sort of
Mhm.
my follow-up question here, and this is something that I plan on asking, but I'm really curious. Are you seeing, like, is that happening more often now, probably with Zoom it is. Are teachers
Mhm.
more willing to do that? What does it take to actually get somebody to sort of be brave enough to do, not brave is not the wrong word. It's just accustomed, I guess, to do it.
Mhm.
Just do it. I mean, you have to start by just doing it. I think that, yes,
Yeah.
Zoom has given us a little bit more familiarity with seeing ourselves uh, on a screen while we're talking and after we're talking. So I think
Mhm.
that that's a good point. Although I don't know if I have any real concrete evidence that that's true, but that's just kind of a guess. I would guess that people are more used to it, and I do think that
Mhm.
reflective practice is kind of, people I think are really embracing it more now as a way of addressing their own professional development needs. And
Mm.
so, yes,
Mhm.
observations, it's something we always did in teacher preparation programs. We had to film ourselves, or someone was watching us, or we were watching other people. But I
Mhm.
think that's something that is becoming more part of the norm now, for in-service teachers as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine with, a lot of programs and educational opportunities still being online or being hybrid, teachers have become more accustomed to recording lectures, for asynchronous content delivery
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
students. And
Flipped
so
learning. Yep.
yeah, and so I
Yeah.
think that, that's already happening. And so I imagine that it's just now a little bit of a tweak. We have to convince teachers, you're already doing this for your students, so just do it more for yourself. It can be a really empowering tool, right, to
Hmm.
have now, but also to look back on, in 10 years and say, wow, look how much I've grown in my teaching.
Yeah.
And the more used to it, the more you do it, the more you get used to it. So,
Hmm. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a really, I mean, I think it's an interesting time right now because we have the availability. The ability to actually record yourself and do these things is just a lot more widely
Hmm.
available where it wasn't before.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that actually leads me to my next question. Like, so for me, it was I was motivated for whatever reason at the time by getting national board certification. To me, as a teacher, I had a master's degree, but I just I was really wanting to like get to that next level and do things that made me better. And so the element of reflective pedagogy or learn, teach, reflect that I experienced was the result of a structure that the national board had put together. And so I would consider that kind of a top down approach. But there are also bottom up approaches. I could have decided I just want to get better. Like I don't need this thing. So my question here is I'd love if you could share examples of elements of like both of those approaches and what outcomes or
Mhm.
insights are achieved in each. Like I'm sure there are teachers who are just doing this. Maybe you all were examples of them because they just wanted to do it on their own. And then there's also situations that districts put in place, not necessarily an outside entity like national board. So what's your experience there?
Yeah, well, I think that self-directed bottom-up approach is really what we're focusing a lot on in the podcast. And also because Shey and I both come from a higher ed adult education perspective. So there is a lot more self-directedness within that field. I, haven't been mandated to do too many specific things. It's more just like, okay, let's improve, and you find ways to improve yourself. And how are you going to stand out in a market of adjunct teachers? But so, I mean, top down, I think does also have a lot of value. I mean, top down can be, the district or the department head decides what needs to be improved and mandates participation in a prescribed PD program. And this is applied to all teachers. It can be based on observation, or it can just be based on external forces that aren't really driven by what the director is actually observing in classes. Um, but so, I mean, I like that you're pointing out that you were really motivated actually
Hmm.
by this board certification, because I think that sometimes in that top-down model, it is hard to find motivation
Yeah.
because it's mandated,
Yep.
right?
Great point.
But in a bottom, so top down though, it doesn't just have to be mandated by something external. It's not just extrinsic motivation. It can also be, I remember, I went to this conference and I saw this teacher talking about X concept, and I really want to apply that to my classroom. So it comes from a place of, I saw this thing, I want to try it in my classroom, rather than I'm observing something in my classroom and now I want to find some solutions to how I could improve on that. Or, I think with novice teachers a lot, they're taking what they learned in the classroom, like some kind of second language acquisition theory, and they decide, okay, I think I want to actually try to apply that in my classroom, and see if it actually works, or how it works in my classroom.
Hmm.
Bottom up is obviously, it's kind of self-explanatory, but a teacher, it really starts from a teacher's reflection and observation of what they're doing, what's happening in their classroom, to determine what they want to focus on in their own professional development and in their own development as teachers. So it's more of noticing patterns, and it takes some practice to be able to notice these patterns as well. So it takes a little more experience and reflection to get to a point where you can really say, aha, that's the thing that I want to take further in my own teaching practice and investigate and improve on myself.
Yeah.
But both are really valid approaches, and I think they also work
Yep.
in tandem.
Exactly. Yeah. I think before I jump in, Shey, anything to add there?
No, she covered it all just perfectly. Go for it, Steve.
Yeah, well, all I do is basically replay back the things that smart people say, and maybe add an element or two. But if I may, I'm going to do that and just talk a little bit about the experience that I have. Like when this where I think that probably listeners have noticed, like we've zoomed out a little bit more from just talking about multilingual education, largely because everything that we talk about multilingual learners, multilingual education, is applicable to education at large. I mean, that's generally the
So that's
case.
good teaching, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. We hear it all the time. And I'm trying
Mhm.
to kind of like, sort of live that in the podcast. But I'm always tempted to kind of bring it into multilingual learner education. I think it's a really good example here because there's an example of I'm a content teacher. I teach math. I've been teaching math for 20 years. The
Mhm.
demographics have shifted in my district. All of a sudden, my English learner population is going up, and I'm a good teacher. I want to make sure that I'm effective at working with those students. I don't
Mhm.
have the training or the education. Maybe there's not even PD available to me. So what I've seen be really effective there, and this is a bit of, I don't really talk about our products on the podcast really almost ever, but this is a good example. Elevation strategies. There are modules, and those modules follow a learn, teach, reflect
Mhm.
practice where the teacher gets the data that they need through our platform. They understand who their students are. They try
Mhm.
something, then they reflect on it, and then if they do it right, they work with other. We'll talk about accountability partners later. They work with others to kind of to
Mhm.
figure out how it's working. But a structure needs to be in place for something like that because some schools and some districts and some places just don't have the menu of options available that are needed. And so what's great about these is that they can take a bottom up approach by saying, boy, this specific element of multilingual learner education, maybe I'm working with newcomers. I can look at this module and I can choose, I'm going to do this one. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to apply that. Instead of somebody coming in and saying, you have 5 modules you need to take. It starts now. It ends in December. Get them done and turn it in, right? Um, so I think
Right.
I couldn't help but bring that up because I think that's a really good example of like the mix of the two. Yeah, it's top down. Your district has purchased this thing, but it's bottom
Mhm.
up, and that you have the agency to choose what you need and what will work for you.
Yeah, because
Mhm.
teachers know their learners. Teachers are the ones who know their learners, know their classroom needs the best. So I
100%.
think that's, yeah, it is important to give that agency.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
cool to see it happen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I would just add, that it sounds like it makes it so much less daunting for teachers who are being given these lists of modules that they have to complete by a certain deadline. Just saying, choose whichever one you think is the most important for you in this moment. Start there, so they can really sort of drive their own path and feel valued, and also just feel like it's so much less of a burden, maybe, and reframe it as an opportunity. I don't know. We
Yeah,
always try
no,
to
it's
look at the
Mhm.
bright side, right?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
custom. It needs to be customized. Whatever
Mm.
product to take elevation side, it could be a situation where yes, it should be more of a top down approach because everybody maybe the school is struggling with reading comprehension. I'm just throwing out an example. That's a situation where yeah, an administrator needs to come in and say, here's the problem, here's the situation, here's what we're going to do. That's leadership. So it's a combination of things, but I think it's really interesting to think about that. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm going to skip around a little bit. I sent you all a list of questions, but now I'm going down the road of of feedback from peers and like having somebody be accountable and working in a community. We started off talking about that with those chat and sips and bringing a community together. But as a teacher, like I was definitely a lot of times my own worst enemy. I had trouble turning like self-criticism into constructive feedback. And I rarely received feedback from my peers. Not because I didn't want to. I think I was a little scared of it at the time, but it just wasn't part of the process. And I'm not even sure I would have been prepared to do anything with it, even if I had gotten that quality feedback. So the question that comes from that is, how should we approach this reflection in a way that's sort of less self-critical and more constructive so that it inspires action and improvement without that kind of self-deprecating effect that can lead to burnout or just like that sense of failure and not the good kind of failure.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
familiar.
I see you're
Yeah.
laughing, so I know you know exactly what I'm talking about because I can hear it
Yeah.
from yeah.
Yeah, Steve. So, this idea of self-deprecation and, perfectionism or being self-critical, Anna and I are recovering
Oh,
perfectionists, we
good.
like to
Me
say.
too.
So we definitely can relate to what you've shared, that hardship that you face. It is really challenging sometimes to get out of that state of rumination, right? Which we often find ourselves in. We get stuck in these negative thought cycles and we can't sort of cross that barrier. So we always remind ourselves and each other that we have to think of our strengths as educators and as individuals first, approaching professional development, like anything else in life, if we think about our strengths rather than our weaknesses first, we feel just a little bit inflated maybe and ready to go down that path and maybe tackle things that are weaknesses in our eyes. So I think starting with an asset-based mindset. I love Carol Dweck, who wrote
Hmm.
about the growth versus the fixed mindset. Thinking about how you can lead with your strengths and of course recognize that being critical of yourself doesn't have to mean, making yourself feel horrible, right? So we've seen in sort of these self-help books for the last, I don't know, probably decade now, thinking about how you talk to yourself and trying to talk to yourself as if you were talking to a friend, right?
Hmm.
I wouldn't say to Anna after one of her lessons, say I'm observing her, I wouldn't say, well, here are all of the things that I thought were total crap, Anna, right?
I
But
hope
that's
not.
how, well, I wouldn't. Well, maybe at this point we've been friends for so long,
I
maybe I
know, yeah.
would, honestly. But I would do that to myself,
Yeah.
right? I think our
Mhm.
inclination is to start there and just sort of rattle off all of the awful things that we did. And in reality, like, are they that awful? Like, we're not open heart we're not doing open heart surgery, right? We're teaching lessons and it's important. The work that we're doing is important, but it's not, a mistake that we make in a lesson or, a mistake from our perception isn't the end of the world, right? There's always opportunity to go back and improve. Um, so I think starting with that and also making sure that you pay attention to the little wins. Those
Mm.
little wins accumulate over
Yeah.
time. And I think that really helps to build up your confidence as a teacher and just as a human. Um,
Mhm.
Anna, you want to jump in
You know,
and add
I
Yeah.
was going to say, Anna, before you
yes.
jump in, because I'm going to forget, you just
Yeah,
said
yeah.
that those little wins accumulate. And I was thinking, I kept
Yeah.
thinking when you talked about we're not doing open heart surgery and you can make a mistake because it's the cumulative effect of what you're doing over the course
Mhm.
of a school year or a semester
Mhm.
or a quarter. And those
Mhm.
Mhm.
those little wins accumulate and typically the
Mhm.
failures the sometimes failures are great because it shows that
Yeah.
you're humble and you're empathetic and that it shows a good a side of you that sometimes students don't see. So that's all I wanted to
Yeah.
say.
Mhm.
Sorry. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
embrace the failure. I mean,
Yeah.
because also,
Yeah.
think of it, what we're trying to teach our students.
Yes.
We're trying to model that. Yeah, Shay and I have the same brain.
I was
I
just
think
gonna
that's
jump
exactly
in.
what you're
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
say.
Yes. Do it. Go there.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to model for our students is, being able to, work through our failures and use them as a way to propel ourselves forward.
Mhm.
And then also, just thinking of the feedback that we give ourselves is not just, what feedback we would provide a friend, but also when we're giving feedback to our learners, we also always start with the positives, or at least, we're trying to always show them what the positives are before moving into the constructive criticism that helps them improve. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think, it's probably, maybe it's not even worth saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sorry. But, when we think about criticism and constructive criticism, they are different things, right? So if we are identifying these sort of negative trends in our teaching or whatever it may be, as long as we accompany those things that we notice, those observations, with ideas, or proposed solutions,
Mhm.
I think that that's, there's nothing but positive in that. It's when we sort of isolate those
Mhm.
maybe negative instances and say, like, that's who I am as a teacher, and there's no way out of it. That's really when we fall into that sort of negative rumination that I mentioned early.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
100% worth saying that
Yeah.
that you
Okay.
that you when
Cool.
you yeah, don't go down the path of just, negativity. What did you learn from it? I think
Hmm.
that's crucial.
Hmm.
Um okay, I have I think two more questions for you all. And I'm trying to think of the best way to approach it. So one of them I think we got into a little bit earlier when I talked about the top down, bottom up approach. And I was talking a little bit about our modules. But I think I took a lot of airspace there. So I'd love to hear kind of what your perspective on that. And that is this idea of personalized professional development. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest benefits of, but it's probably the most important part of professional development in general, professional learning, and it's a key element of reflective pedagogy. So I've talked about some of the ways that I've seen this happen, but what are some of the ways that you've seen teachers tailor their reflective practices to match their needs, their schedules, their personalities, the groups they're working with, what they want to learn, et cetera? Because that's tricky. If we're being honest, there's only so much time in the day, and teachers are obviously stretched very thin at this point.
Yeah. And so, knowing, Steve, that your listenership probably is primarily K through 12 teachers, right?
Correct?
We know that K through 12 teachers don't always have control over their professional development, when we're talking about sort of top down mandated PD. So we we understand and we acknowledge, sort of the challenges, but we want to remind teachers that any little bit counts. And so that's sort of the beautiful thing about reflective pedagogy, is that you can really tailor your experience based on your needs and based on your bandwidth. I think most importantly for this group of listeners. Um,
Mhm.
Anna, here I'll let you jump in here and talk about a cool tool we have.
Yeah, I mean, we've thought about this a lot, and what it means to tailor PD to our own needs. And so we actually developed a tool, in the last year or so, I'd say,
Mhm.
that we shared with at TESOL. I think it was at the
Mhm.
Teaching English for Speakers of Other Languages uh, a convention that happens annually last year in Portland. And so in this tool, we're kind of asking teachers to walk through all of these steps of to determine what what lies within their ability at that moment and what the best kind of PD plan would be
Mm,
for them. And so the
Mhm.
questions involved in that tool are, just first determining what they would like to work on, which is, what are
Mhm.
some areas that I've reflected on, that I've observed in my own classroom, that I would like to learn more about. And then from there, thinking a little bit more metacognitively about how do I learn best? Is it through self-reflection? Is it through collaboration, working with some kind of accountability partner, or a little bit of both, maybe a PLN, whatever the combination is, reflecting on that, how I learn best. How do I feel about technology also? Do I want to be sitting in on a Zoom? Do I want to be doing an online module? Or
Mhm.
is this person someone who prefers to actually just engage in an in-person professional development experience? And then, as Shey mentioned, bandwidth, how much time do I have as a very busy teacher have for PD outside of my regular duties? And that's, I
Mhm.
think, a hard one, because Shey and I have been very good at overbooking ourselves and then getting overwhelmed and then
Yeah.
giving up on all of it, right? So it's really important to
Mhm.
think about how much time you actually have, how much bandwidth, not just time, but also energy
Mhm.
that you
Mhm.
have to put into something. And then from there, think about, what are the offerings in my community? What are the
Mhm.
choices I have to choose from? Start doing a little bit of research. It could be an online course. It could be a regional conference. It could be some kind of small working group at your
Yeah.
school. It could be webinar recordings and you just watch those while you're making dinner every day, or it could be a book
Mhm.
club. It could be working with a mentor, just brainstorming with an accountability partner. There are just so many different combinations of professional development. And so thinking about what format will work for you and how much you can take on is really
Mhm.
so we have a tool for that. We'll share the link with you as well,
Mhm. Yeah.
so that listeners can also just take a look and start having that little reflective journey for themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
no, I was just
I
gonna
was just
say
gonna.
real
Mhm.
quick, and then you can jump in.
Yeah.
I, I haven't seen the tool. Somehow I missed it, and part of me is like, I wish that I had seen that tool before we talked. But actually, I'm glad that I didn't because you could explain it, and then I can look at it later. But it sounds amazing. I mean, the idea of bringing in some metacognition in there, thinking about how you
Mhm.
learn, I think is missing from a lot of these. Even if it is personalized, there's not
Mhm.
time to really think about how you learn. Tech or no
Mhm.
tech, so simple but genius, right? Like maybe somebody doesn't want to use technology. The assumption is that we have technology, so
Mm-hmm.
we're going to use it. Not always the case.
Yeah.
And then of
Right.
course,
Mm-hmm.
bandwidth. And you brought up a
Mhm.
lot of like things that people wouldn't consider formal professional development. What's happening in my community? I mean, getting out of
Mm-hmm.
our silos. I can't wait to look at it. Shay, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted
Yeah.
you.
I
No,
should
I
have
mean,
shared that before.
yeah,
Yeah.
we should have. It's
I'm kind of
okay,
glad
but
you didn't,
we are
honestly. Like, it
described.
makes me more curious about it, and I feel like the result
Mm-hmm.
is
Good.
It's
maybe
it's
we'll
it's
see.
it's yes. I
It's
hope
super
you'll enjoy it.
simple,
It is simple.
it's
Mm-hmm.
simple, but as you mentioned, Steve, it's questions that are worth asking. And, Anna mentioned that we have a tendency to sort of overbook ourselves. And, all of this, our podcast was born during the pandemic. And of course, we had this explosion of professional development opportunities, online. And I think like a lot of other teachers, both Anna and I were like, let's do as much as we can. Did you see this one? And we sort of booked ourselves out almost every day. I remember
Mhm.
each of us having something that we wanted to do. And, a webinar, an hour-long webinar doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have one every day on top of, your work, we sort of did it to ourselves. So this tool was created for us too, sort of as a reflection tool.
Totally.
Um, we reflecting on your teaching doesn't have to be this super structured to do. It can just be as simple as asking yourselves these questions and then really building out sort of the schedule that works best for you. You know
Mm-hmm.
you best, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, aside from two other questions that I want to ask you that we ask everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the first is really important because we didn't get to everything. And I'm glad we just mentioned that tool. I'm sure there's a lot more that people can learn by either listening to the podcast and we have a blog and a website and lots of good stuff. So my question is, what's the best way for people to learn more about the work that you all are doing?
Well, there are so many ways. So, first, I think, is connecting with us on social media. As we mentioned, we do structure our episodes so that they are sort of an asynchronous conversation with
Mm-hmm.
our international community of listeners. So, you can engage with our reflective questions for each episode on social media. So, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, X, or Twitter at think-aloud_pod. You can find us on Facebook, the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. Subscribe so that you figure when you find out when we release new episodes. You can find us pretty much anywhere where you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. We're also on YouTube. Listen to the things we've done. We just celebrated 50 episodes, so we're very excited. It came with a blooper reel, so you'll get the sort of less serious
A
side
blooper
of
reel. I
things.
love
We have
that.
Yeah.
three. I mean, you can just
Another
search all
idea I
of our
might have to
blooper reels.
steal. I have
Yeah.
Ah,
so many bloopers.
it's
Yeah.
actually it's always fun to put those together. We don't,
Self-deprecating in a fun way, by the way.
yes,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
don't,
we
we
think
don't know
we're
if anyone
funny.
likes them. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. We don't know if anyone thinks we're funny, but we think we are, so we
That's
enjoy
all that
them.
matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've
Mhm.
also got a newsletter that comes out
Mhm.
every month. You can find out what we've been up to. We also share, in addition to new episode releases, we share what we've been hooked on. So you can learn a little bit about what each of us like to read in our spare time. And join the Friends of the Podcast WhatsApp group that we have. We'll share the link with you. And contribute to episodes. I think that's maybe the one that's most important, Anna. We're always looking for audience contributions. We truly want to make this a conversation with listeners, not just sort of a monocast, just the two of us. I think that's it. Did I miss any?
Well, sorry, it is a lot. Sorry to your
Yeah.
listeners for throwing so much at
Yes.
them. We will also be at the TESOL conference in 2024 in Tampa
Mhm.
this year in March. So if any of your listeners overlap within that field and are interested, we will be doing a poster session at 11 a.m. on Thursday, as well as a presentation on Friday. And we are actually going to be doing a lot with the tool that we started developing last year and thinking about how, giving people opportunities to reflect. We're very much about the conversational aspect of it. So
Mhm.
collaboration. So it won't just be like us talking at you. It is very, very much a moment to stop and reflect in each of our sessions.
Mhm.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to have you send me all of those links so that we can post them on the show
For
notes
sure.
as well as on the accompanying blog post, and folks can find all that. Like I said, in the show notes, but also at elevationeducation.com/EL community, where we'll post this episode as well as an accompanying blog post. One more question, and I'm going to ask you to be quick, even though everybody wants to list a whole bunch of things. Books. What are you reading? Or what are you watching? What is a resource that's had an important influence on you, either personally or professionally? It can be either. Would love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, in the spirit of not listing a bunch of things, which I think
Yeah.
is what our knee-jerk reaction would be.
Mhm.
But one book that actually Shey and I read together that I think has had an influence on us individually and also our thinking for some of the episodes that we've focused on in the podcast is Race, Empire, and English Language Teaching by Dr. Suhanti Matha.
Mhm.
And it's really excellent. I mean, it just really talks about the link between English language teaching and a colonial past and present. So I won't go into the details, but it does follow the narrative of a few novice teachers who are grappling with questions about this and providing both that kind of empirical research and their qualitative research, as well as some historical background and frameworks to help readers understand the full context of what we're working with as English language teachers.
Great. Good recommendation. I think I've heard that one before, but it's been a while.
It's been out for, I don't remember what year actually it was, but it's been out for a while, and it's a pretty thin text, so it's actually quite
Yeah.
quick to
Somebody
get through,
mentioned it.
even though it's quite dense already.
One of our guests mentioned it, but I don't remember. It might have been recently.
Ah.
Anyway. All right,
Mhm.
Shey, what about you?
Okay. So I am going to go the professional route, I suppose. This comes from a program, my master's program, actually, over a decade ago now, Dimensions of Engaged Teaching by Laura Weaver and Mark Wilding. This is a book that really asks teachers to consider, that they're educating a human and not just teaching a language or teaching a subject area. And, I think that it's sort of led the what's the phrase? I always get phrases wrong. Anna makes fun of me sometimes. My idiom use is always backwards or upside
They're
down.
creative, yeah.
Creative is the right word for it.
Led the charge. That's
Yeah.
actually what I wanted to say in thinking about 21st century skills and really cultivating empathy within the classroom, asking students to engage with each other and consider the entire individual in front of them rather than just, being transactional in their interactions. And I think that it has just a lot of great imagery, and it has printables. And so I've used it with teachers who I've worked with in training. And it's just the idea that, we have to contend with the emotional and social skills as much as the academic skills with our students, but also with each other outside of the educational space.
Love it. Two great recommendations on books, and lots of other things that people can go to and look for, which we will link to. I want to thank Liam again for the introduction, if he's listening. And I want to thank both of you for taking the time. I know before we started, I said where we all were, but I didn't mention that it's now almost 8 o'clock in the morning in Seattle for Anna, who is doing this sort of before she actually has to go and do her day job, or whatever you want to call it. And I really appreciate that you all connecting in totally different time zones. I thought it was a great conversation, and I appreciate you helping me kind of rethink what this sort of idea of reflecting really means. We didn't get specifically into a lot of the EL multilingual education stuff, but this is applicable for everybody. And so thank you for also helping me kind of get out of that little niche area and realize that this is for everybody, whether you're teaching multilingual learners or not. And by the way, you're probably teaching multilingual learners if you're a teacher in the United States right now. So with that, thank you both so much. Really appreciate it. And let's keep collaborating.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much,
Steve. So wonderful
It's been
to
such a
talk to you
treat
today.